conversation movement. I was trying to consider where it was, but the AWE seems it's almost like a collaborative group, but also a bit of a movement as well. So it's a really interesting.
That's interesting to hear you reflect that, Haydn, because we're now sort of almost 6 years old, and we're just growing exponentially. And so it's you know, having been involved in it from, you know, the year dot, as it were, I find it hard to sort of see what the outside people see us as. So I really like that idea of sort of a movement.
Yeah, a collaboration of like-minded people who are interested in seeing an evolution and a development in space to deliver the most effective possible service to the community, which has to, by its very nature, involve all members of the community.
Exactly.
So it's about you know, the emergency services reflecting the community they serve, which is a very Peelian sort of, that comes from Sir Robert Peel's thinking about the original concept of police. It must represent the community it serves. If it doesn't, its legitimacy is going to be questioned.
And I think that's why sort of diversity or inclusion and diversity more broadly is really starting to become an issue for the sector.
Oh, indeed. And
we are not very diverse.
Yeah, and as volunteer numbers recede for a whole range of reasons, we need every possible person who feels that they want to be a part of it to go, yeah, great, please join us, we need you.
Exactly.
Pressure grows for a whole range of reasons. Excellent. Oh, this is really a wonderful opportunity, and it has been. I'll reflect it in my presentation. There has been some frustration for me. I came back from this journey thinking, oh, you know, the agencies will go, oh, Haydn, please join us at the table, talk about what we need to do about change, because this is really good. Well, was I disappointed? No, we're sure that's important. We'll get to it. But at the moment, we're putting wet stuff on red stuff, and that's really important. So we haven't got time for that stuff. Meanwhile, our volunteer numbers are sort of, and yet, yeah, it's a sense of frustration. So the opportunity, it occurs to me as a fellow, is my mission, perhaps, is it mission? I don't know. My task is to contribute to getting a conversation going so people more broadly wake up and go, actually, we have an issue here. We need to do something different. We need to do it differently now, because that's not going to help us tomorrow. Cool.
I'm going to pop myself on mute as I won't be chatting, and we'll let people in at 12 on the dot and see people are starting to arrive, which is great. Good luck,
and will
Jane.
you make sure that, thanks. Will you make sure that this is my first time doing the facilitation, Haydn, so please forgive me if I have to make any pauses while I regather myself.
That's fine.
And you'll open the chat for questions. Yep. Bridget, yep.
Did you want to do the Q&A as a verbal or?
Oh yeah, I can have a look
through chat, and then questions. You'll see, I can see in the chat, Haydn, there's a question on. Any thoughts on that? I mean, you can kind of vet them if you like.
Yeah, I might read a few out. We'll see how we go timing wise as well.
Yeah, sure. Okay.
Try and sort of keep it to an hour, but yep.
That's right. I'll just, like a willow, I'll just sort of go with whichever way you feel that it needs to adjust to. You'll find you're like a trailer behind, a caravan behind a car. Hopefully, I'll just follow you.
Let's hope there's no accidents.
Nice.
No, we'll be right.
Oh, look, I might start letting people in. You can just say hello as they arrive.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Hi, Faye. Hi, Michelle.
Hi.
We'll just give it another minute just to make sure that everybody's who's registered is joining us. The numbers are looking pretty good. Bridget, can you just let me know when you think everybody's joined?
Yeah, absolutely. I reckon we'll give it another minute or so, Jan.
Yep, thanks. All right, well, we might kick off, try and keep things to time. So thank you everyone for joining us today. We're very lucky to have Haydn come and present to us. But firstly, we'd not like to acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of the lands upon which we're meeting and pay our respects to elders past and present. All would like to recognise that sovereignty was never ceded over these lands and that land always was, always will be Aboriginal land. I'm coming to you today from Gumbaynggirr country on the New South Wales North Coast, and I'd love to know where you're all joining us from as well, if you'd like to pop that in the chat. Or also recognises the unique role of Maori and embraces the Treaty of Waitangi, New Zealand's foundation document confirming Maori as Tagata Whenua, the first people of Aotearoa, New Zealand. It recognises that they have absolute authority and sovereignty over their lands, resources, and treasured possessions, while embracing the three guiding principles of the Diriti: partnership, participation, and protection. My name's Jan Rooney. I am one of the event portfolio leads who has just joined the OAR network on a volunteer basis to do some work with the committee, and I'm pleased to be able to facilitate this session today. For those of you who aren't familiar with us, we are the Australian Women in Emergencies Network. We work to promote, support, and recognise women in emergency management and disaster resilience. We have almost 2,000 members across Australia, New Zealand, and the Pacific, and provide our members with a range of benefits, including events like this one we have today. I'll just let you all know as well that today's session is being recorded, and we will provide the recording of this session to our members following the event. If you have any questions for Haydn throughout the presentation, please put them in the chat and we'll do a Q&A at the end of the session. We'll try and get through as many questions as we can while we've got Haydn with us. So as an introduction to Haydn, Haydn is a principal consultant with Recap Consultants, where he focuses on leadership and ethics. Since November 2021, he has been a contracted facilitator for the Australian Public Service Commission Academy. Formerly a police officer of the South Australian Police Force and member of the Australian Border Force, Haydn is a specialist in law enforcement and regulatory leadership learning. A certified DISC Advanced and MBTI facilitator, Haydn has a particular interest in helping frontline leaders build confidence and hone their leadership skills. In July 2020, Haydn commenced a PhD at Griffith University, Working Together or Working Apart: Interoperability and Organisational Cultures across Regulatory, Emergency Service, Law Enforcement, Military Organisations during major emergency and disaster responses. He is also a volunteer firefighter with the South Australian Country Fire Service. And today we're lucky enough to have Haydn here with us to share the results of his Churchill Fellowship research, which explores leadership in emergency services and volunteer organisations. If I can just... Oh, sorry, I think we might have all got muted then. So I just wanted to welcome Haydn and we'll pass over to you. Thanks, Haydn.
Very good. Thank you very much, Jan. It's a great pleasure to be here today, and thank you for the opportunity to present. I'll dive straight into my presentation after your generous introduction. So My journey was around a Churchill Fellowship to look at volunteer firefighter leadership development, and this was something that occurred to me during the 2019-20 bushfires. I was working in New South Wales, Upper Ankling Ennis, for a number of weeks. Also in South Australia on Kangaroo Island, which was quite problematic, and also up the Cuddly Creek fire. And we saw examples of leadership and teams functioning really well, but occasionally we had various detonations of teams. And it occurred to me that we're sending our volunteer emergency service personnel into really stressful places and asking them to dig deep into leadership capacity, and yet we don't invest in leadership development. There is zero development for leaders in emergency services in the volunteer space, particularly within Australia. So by way of introduction, we'd be all familiar, I'm guessing, with Winston Churchill. And before Winston Churchill died, Prince Philip went to see him and said, well, you'll be dead soon. How do you want to be remembered? And I'm reliably informed that's pretty much how the conversation went. And anybody who's heard stories of Prince Philip can probably well believe that. And Winston Churchill commented, well, he saw there was going to be statues and things like that. But what he wanted to have was a research trust that would allow ordinary citizens to go and find important stuff to bring back to their community. And so was born the Winston Churchill Memorial Trust. In 1965, a fundraiser was run in Australia. They also did the same in the UK and New Zealand. I couldn't get it off the ground in Canada, I'm not sure why. But in Australia, New Zealand and the UK today, we have the Winston Churchill Memorial Trust. They're all independent of each other. And the Australian Trust has around about $30+ million in trust. And every year they send about 120 Australians off to look at all sorts of things. And whilst today my focus is on the findings of my fellowship, I'd love to see more emergency services volunteers getting Churchill Fellowships. So let me just run a very quick bit over a minute promo video to give you a view of the fellowships and how broad they are. Just have a look at the various categories that these people undertake their fellowships in.
It's a chance to go overseas, to learn something that you can't learn in Australia, bring the knowledge home, benefit yourself, but importantly, benefit your country.
The slate's clean. You can take it wherever you want to.
It's helped me grow as a person, and it's certainly helped me develop and advance in my industry.
I just think it's a wonderful opportunity to rise up and reach out and find the people that you want that can enrich your own experience.
If you are lucky enough to receive a Churchill Fellowship, it's not just about who you get to meet, it's the experiences, it's the unanticipated consequences of going overseas and travel. These people really want to help you, and they're going to have their own networks, and they're going to get you to go to other places too. Be prepared for the unanticipated, it's the best I can say, and look, have some fun.
So this enabled me to work with world leaders and sit across from people who had been running dance companies or dance theatre companies for 20+ years.
There's been so much growth in sharing and making connections with people now that I'm back in Australia. I'm really excited to see where it takes me.
Find out how you can travel the world to benefit Australia at churchillfellowships.com.au.
That's the presentation there. Give me half a second. It's ever easy. Just forgive me for a second, I'll just reboot that because it's not going back to the PowerPoint. So the Winston Churchill Memorial Trust sends about 120 Australians around the world every year to look at a whole range of topics. And if you were interested in potentially putting your hand up for a Churchill Fellowship, that's something that potentially you could easily do. Just give me a second. I'm just working out why it's not coming back to the PowerPoint. nothing's ever easy, is it? I tested everything, made sure everything was good. And this thing is not cooperating. Here we go. So my journey, I'll screen share again. Gotta love gremlins, don't you? My journey was an investigation into learning development options for volunteer firefighters, for the reasons that we had already mentioned, that we saw a lot of problems during the 2019-20 fires. And the volunteer landscape we work in is, and I'm sure you'd be all familiar with this, is expansive, but it's very problematic. We have around about under 200,000 Australians volunteering in firefighting services. There are also, in addition, people in state emergency services, surf life-saving, volunteer marine rescue. I get that those numbers are not counted in here, but the key threads and themes would impact on all those volunteers as well, and they are equally as critical to fire volunteers. But my focus here is particularly on volunteer firefighters. And the 2020 Commonwealth Productivity Commission report looked at our volunteer fire resources, and we found that about 50% of new recruits leave within the first 12 months. And in actual fact, their reasons for leaving once they join an emergency service, they cite toxic cultures and poor leadership as reasons for leaving. We've also seen the number of volunteers decline 10% in the last decade, about 16,000 volunteers. And while we see an uptick after a major event, lots of people want to join and be a part of it. Unfortunately, if they're not staying and building those skills, that's a real problem. And we know we did a whiteboard exercise here in the CFS unit that I'm involved in, a whiteboard exercise to work out how long it takes for somebody to be 80% useful in 80% of circumstances as a volunteer firefighter. And depending on how busy their brigade is, it's somewhere between 2 and 5 years, because it's a lived apprenticeship. Yes, you do a 2-day course to be a firefighter, that's true, but the building of those skills is quite longitudinal. It's not something that's just downloaded into someone's head. So we have a long, slow build in getting capacity going. The world in which our volunteer firefighters are operating is increasingly holding them accountable for their leadership. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. We're seeing some circumstances that indicate and perhaps show how we have some problems in that area. And then unexpectedly, I want to talk about the emergence of what I describe as mea culpa moments. This is where public reporting of behaviours in an agency explode, sometimes very violently, if you like a volcano or some other kind of explosion. And the mea culpa moment involved commonly 4 elements: bullying, hazing, sexual harassment, sexual assault. And I've got evidence from around the world where this is the case, and I think there are lessons for Australia. Additionally, we're having these longer campaign responses, so we're deploying people to the field for much longer. And this is a challenge because our volunteers may be time poor. So we've got some headwinds against volunteers. And if we have circumstances where volunteers don't want to remain, well, that's really going to hurt us quite badly. We also have an aging volunteer workforce, although I don't think we're quite clear on what that means. I'll talk about why that's the case, and that's a critical aspect of understanding where our people are at. And also in the current economic environment, we're seeing economic stress for younger volunteers, because people have to pay for rent, they have to pay for accommodation if they're trying to buy a house. Increasingly, young people have to potentially get second jobs to pay for all this. When is their time for volunteering? And if their time for volunteering, even if it's taken up by joining something like the CFS, CFA, RFS, or the State Emergency Service, they've got to spend all this time on just the operational aspects of learning. Where is the time available if we're going to invest in leadership? Because it's not enough to send people on a 2-day leadership course and go, oh, that's it. They've been told about leadership. It should be good. It doesn't work like that. It's a far more complex scenario. And also, and I'd already mentioned, in Australia, we effectively have 0 effective leadership development. And I come to this as an educative, I suppose, specialist. I did a Master of Education at UniSA, a research project into learning for ethical leadership in law enforcement environments. So I'm not approaching this from a position of not understanding about adult learning and adult learning concepts. I'm very deeply imbued in that. So And Churchill Fellowships are not an academic endeavour. It's very practical, it's very hands-on, but at some point the research of the world has to connect with the reality of the world, and I hope that's where we get the rubber hitting the road for a really good outcome. And we often think of volunteer leadership development as, oh, we'll send them on a 2-day course, they'll hold hands, sing Kumbaya, talk about what good leadership is, all nod, and after 2 days walk away having scones and jam and cream, and everything's fine. What more did they need? However, we know that volunteer leadership development is actually quite complex. It takes time to build self-awareness. So this suggests to us that leadership learning needs to be longitudinal. It needs to happen perhaps over the entire life cycle of the volunteer, right from the get-go, from the start, where they understand what it means to be a volunteer. It's going to have some sort of deep reflection, and that means looking deeply into self and questioning, where am I at? What's my motivation? This can be very challenging. This is a bit like Alice looking in the looking glass. It can be quite deep, and I've got some examples of this from overseas. You're going to have an individual development plan. Each individual has to have a customized development plan that, again, is going to be longitudinal and take them through a development journey. And we're going to have to differentiate between good against excellent performance for leaders and be able to show people what it means to be good. They're going to have to demonstrate the application of these skills on the job over time. So it's not just a matter of just showing that I could do it on one night. On a Tuesday night at training, I did this. Well, no, that's not enough. And critically, it's going to have effective mentoring. And I have examples from around the world where mentoring is a unique feature of it, but everybody is expected to have a mentor. Everybody is expected to be a mentor. So we end up with this flow, if you like, of leadership development. And you can see here from the, this is a model by Quattro and others, a leadership development model. When they pulled apart what were the domains of leadership. And when you start to think about what's required, there's actually quite a lot. It's quite a highly skilled set of activities, actions, ways of thinking, ways of being. It's not simple to get there. So my Churchill Fellowship involved 5 countries. I went to New Zealand, the United States, to Canada, to Denmark, and ultimately to the Philippines. Philippines was a bit of an add-on. I was meant to go to France, but the French National Fire Academy, I don't know, they just didn't answer my replies. So Churchill Fellowships are quite dynamic, and you have to be a little bit flexible in your approach. But my journey actually started whilst I obviously headed in order of these countries. My research journey connections happen first in Canada. When you put in for a Churchill Fellowship, you come up with an on-paper exercise of what you would do, but you can't ring these people and say, oh, I might be a Churchill Fellow. Can I come and see you and talk with you? So you come up with this concept of where you'd go and a hypothetical about who you would talk to. And then a bit like winning the lottery, somebody rings and says, oh, congratulations, you've won. You know that thing you told us about? Bring it to life. And we needed to bring it to life quite quickly. So that was quite confronting when I had said I talked to places like Fire and Emergency New Zealand and CAL FIRE and others. Now I've got to make that happen. That was quite a treat. Fortunately, the Danes helped me because connecting with the Danes was the easiest part of the story. I went to the local Danish honorary consul here in Adelaide, who connected me with the Danish Foreign Affairs Department in Copenhagen, who connected me with the Danish Emergency Management Agency. And those connections all happened in 24 hours from me initiating. I'd like to talk with you guys. I'm interested in what you do. And I built the trip from the inside out with Denmark at the centre and everything else cascaded out. So it really is an interesting exercise in logistics. It was a 55-day journey, delayed because of COVID. I covered 50,000 kilometres, interviewed 74 people across 20 different organisations and agencies. The report, which is available on the Churchill Trust website, has freely available 25,000 words. I get that it's long. They're not meant to be an academic document. Having said that, if it's not well placed and well constructed and connected with the theoretical and current research, it's very hard to penetrate any agency's learning and development areas. They sort of cross their arms, look at you and yeah, so what are you basing this on? You're just making stuff up. So I had to walk this kind of fine line between being academic and being practical, and it was sort of like this no man's land, if you like. I think it was a grey area. So I hope I've done that and achieved a pracademic paper that is readable, notwithstanding that's 25,000 words. There is a short executive summary for you to look at. The journey commenced in Adelaide, where I am based, and I headed eastward. I elected to go that way for a couple of reasons, but this was the journey that I took. So my first port of call was to our friends in New Zealand. Love the New Zealanders because they're very clever at what they do. They have few resources. They have to be very efficient at what they do. So they're very clever at coming up with innovative solutions. If the New Zealanders are doing something, we really need to consider and look and talk to them, because they always do a really clever job. FENS is a combination of fire services from around New Zealand. There was the professional fire service, the paid fire service, and there were about 40 fire services which were run by local government. In 2015, there was a decision just to smash them all together and turn it into Fire and Emergency New Zealand. Here we are, 2024, they're still working that out. It has reached a significant level of, excuse me, I'll just shut the door. A little bit of noise there. It has reached a significant level of development, but they have about a bit under 12,000 volunteer firefighters, and some fire stations are combined professional and volunteer fire services working together. During the day, you'll see paid firefighters, and at night, you'll see volunteers. So the New Zealanders have invested heavily in leadership development. They have an operations leadership course at their training centre at Rotorua. This goes for 2 weeks. It's built around incident management, but it takes the firefighters into a stressful place under the guises of the exercise. And then along the way, when there are the personality flare-ups, they stop and say, actually, what we're really talking about here is how we exercise our leadership under pressure. So it is leadership development wrapped up in the view of operations, but the reality of it is it's around those people skills and those people aspects. And the New Zealanders have worked with the New Zealand Defence Force to build a concept around leadership development. So they actually have built a framework for this. We have nothing like this in Australia. There's little tiny patches of stuff being done in agencies, but there is no coherent story. For FENS, they start, and you can see that at the bottom about leading self. This is about followership as the first part of leadership. If you can't follow instructions and be a part of the team, you can't expect to be leading a team. And it builds from there right up to the whole agency. They have some significant assistance from the New Zealand Defence Force in building this. Getting this out across volunteers is a challenge, however, and within some core chunks that they've built centrally, they're allowing regions of Fire and Emergency New Zealand to experiment with this and have a go at bringing this to life in a range of places to see how this works. So it's a little bit of an experiment in progress. I was up outside of Auckland at Silverdale and the fire stations in and around Silverdale, and talking with the volunteer liaison officers. They have permanently appointed staff who specifically look after volunteers and make sure that dots are being connected with them. I don't think they've got them all over New Zealand, but they have a number of them who are focused on helping to deliver this stuff. And they're seeing some really good results. Critically also, Fire and Emergency New Zealand have an internal research capacity. So they know what's happening in the hearts, minds and souls of their volunteers. Currently, the online library, which is freely available to anybody, has about 170 plus papers in it. It is completely open and accessible. The executives see the reports at the same time as they're put out there. So there's a great deal of transparency. FENS is really trying hard to be a very transparent agency. Before I go forward to CAL FIRE, one thing, and it was during the journey at FENS that they mentioned to me, you would have heard of the Coral Shore Report. Coral Shore Report, I'm here about leadership development. What's the Coral Shore Report? The Coral Shore Report, a retired Supreme Court judge from New Zealand. There were instances of poor behaviour in FENS, and it was now what I call the mea culpa moment, the bullying, hazing, sexual harassment, sexual assault. It came to a head, there were media reports, and the New Zealand government commissioned a review by Justice Shaw, who pretty much tipped the dirty laundry down Main Street, and bless FENS for doing that. That's really challenging to do for any agency, but they do it and they continue to do it. They're still coming to terms with the findings of that report and getting change there. But the agency acknowledges that there are problems, and this was a critical point. I again wasn't looking for any of this. They said up front to me, "Oh, you would know about the Coral Shore report. It's not really very good." And I said, "What's that?" And they told me. I went, "Wow, that sounds terrible." And that's helped them drive some of their leadership development thinking. Okay, cool. So I parked that. Again, I was looking at, so what's in your leadership development? But that thread that there was a major detonation in FENS sort of sat in the back of my head. From there, I went to CAL FIRE, headed over to Sacramento in the United States. A really interesting agency, about 12,000 paid firefighters, about 12,000 volunteers. You can look, they've got a very sizable budget in Australian dollars. It's nudging up towards $4.5 billion. They cover the state of California for all hazards. So it's not just fire, it's not just rescue. They do everything. It's like SES and fire service combined into one, adding in a healthy dose of earthquake and other things. A very, very interesting organisation. The fellow there in the photograph in maroon, Monty Manson, the head of CAL FIRE's professional development area. And I was eventually put in touch with Monty. Oh, professional development, why am I talking to them? I'm looking at the learning, leadership development stuff. And Monty said to me, no, in CAL FIRE, we worked out that what we needed to do was place leadership development. We didn't put it with the training centre because that's about wet stuff on red stuff. They're always too busy. You ask the trainers, they're always too busy to get into, and we'll get to that leadership stuff. We're too busy with the operational stuff. There's this focus on operations in these agencies. And this came to the fore for me even when I was there. You can see the photograph of me out at McClellan Air Force Base, which is now a CAL FIRE operating centre, ex-US Air Force. They've got some wonderful toys, and CAL FIRE took me out there to show me all their different aircraft and stuff. I wasn't there looking at firefighting aviation. I was there looking at leadership, but when you're here, I want to show you this. And the idea from this, and I also saw this at FENS, they wanted to show me some of their operational kit. And I saw this all along. I think this sits in the culture and the psyche of operational emergency service places. We're so focused on the operations. Yes, we know the leadership stuff is important. We'll get to it. And the CAL FIRE people have invested heavily in it, but they were keen to show me their kit. And Monty said, no, we didn't put, for that reason, they didn't put leadership development in with the training area, with the L&D area. They sat it in with professional standards. Why? Because effective leadership is about professional standards. And moreover, Monty said when he goes to talk to trainees or mid-level or senior level managers in CAL FIRE to talk about their leadership concept, he said, well, you really need to be listening hard because effective leadership is about being professional. I'm about professional standards. And while my area helps deliver that learning, also the files that come across my desk about, no, we're unfortunately gonna have to terminate this person because of XYZ behaviours. He said, these come across my desk. So I'm intimately connected with the outcome of poor leadership. So the executive thought that it was good to perhaps beef up my portfolio and sweep up professional development as far as leadership goes. And I only spoke with Monty 2 days ago in an online call, and he reiterated that CAL FIRE is convinced that this is a way forward. And I think this was a major moment for me. And bless the people at CAL FIRE, they were very open to me, and they said straight up, we've actually had some issues. We started this leadership journey because we had some problems, and they described for me their mea culpa moment that started at the training centre I own. Bullying, hazing, sexual harassment, sexual assault had expanded out into fraud, into a whole range of behaviours investigated by the California Highway Patrol. And it was so significantly problematic, there were questions in the California legislature as to, is CAL FIRE fit for purpose? Should we actually get rid of this organisation? This is where the question of social licence comes in. If we don't deal with these things up front, and we don't invest in leadership learning, the explosion will bring the social licence of the agency into question. And at some point, the politicians might start scratching their head and saying, maybe we need to actually just get rid of the agency and start all over again, push over all the sandcastles, sweep the sand back, let's rebuild. It can be that significant. And that was where CAL FIRE ended up. CAL FIRE connected with the Ken Blanchard company as they were looking for a leadership learning concept. because they really didn't have anything. They were starting from blank sheet of paper. And what they did was engage with situational leadership. Ken Blanchard, a company out of San Diego, and Ken Blanchard actually, the company flew their contract manager up to San Diego to be with me and Monty for the 4 days I was at CAL FIRE, just answering my questions and making sure I understood what they were trying to do in partnership with CAL FIRE. CAL FIRE are very open. It was a $5 million contract over 5 years to get situational leadership as a learning concept across all staff, entry level, mid-level, senior managers, and different levels had to undertake a different amount of learning. And you can see the photographs there from the wall. Yeah, it shows the values and the vision up on the wall at the training centre where the new trainees come to dine. But the point that Monty was making for me there when we visited the training centre was the professional standards people work intimately with the training centre, so that the operational trainers who are doing the wet stuff on red stuff, the rescue stuff, are also reinforcing about the values and behaviours, but they're not responsible for fully delivering the learning in there. And one of the things that came out of that was significant as well, was technical trainers who are good at running hose bowls and hose lays and rescue ropes and litters onto ambulances and helicopters and stuff. Those people may not and probably don't have the skills required to develop leaders, because there's a different skill set for an educator in a leadership space. Trainers, there's one way to do it right, and there's a million ways to do it wrong. And there's a facilitator guide that lays out every step. Leadership learning, well, it depends who's in the room and what their experiences are. And there's a million ways to do it right and a million ways to do it wrong, but it depends on all the variables. So it's a bit like comparing powered flight to gliding. Yes, it's all flying, but the leadership development stuff is more nuanced, which means if you're a good trainer or a technical trainer, doesn't mean that you're going to be able to facilitate a leadership learning conversation. They're a very different thing. From there, I headed eastwards to the National Interagency Fire Centre. Fascinating place. I think Australia is working to come up with something similar. It coordinates and manages fire incidents across the entire continental United States. You can see there from some of the bullet points, like they've got the 12,000 handheld radios ready to deploy, and Motorola let them break open the radios and change the frequencies. And anybody who's worked with Motorola know how precious they are about their radios. And if they're going to do that, obviously this is a pretty switched on place. The key thing that I wanted to see here wasn't about the resources, although you can see a photograph there of the warehouse. So it's looking one direction. I turn, look the other, I see exactly the same. Look left, look right, all 4 ways. The amount of stuff in their warehouse ready to deploy is massive. But the people I wanted to talk to are pictured there in the top right-hand corner. The Great Basin Bureau of Land Management smoke jumpers. These are the people that jump out of aircraft to fight fires with no water, no hoses. It's all hand tools. The head of the smoke jumpers explained to me it's a very flat structure. It's not a hierarchical structure. There are no badges of rank. What do you mean, firefighters with no badges of rank? It's all about getting the right person into the right position for leadership. And it's about developing new young people to be leaders as quickly as possible. So even though they'll have experienced people in the smoke jumper family, when a new person joins, they'll start in a thing called the loft, where they make their harnesses and make their parachutes. I said, make parachutes. I thought he was joking. Then he showed me, and I've got a photo I've got up here of all the sewing machines. Yeah, they make their own parachute harnesses, assemble their own parachutes, and have to jump with it. And then from there, they go into operations, training, logistics. They go to all the different departments and eventually work out which department is their home. So it works a bit like special forces concepts in the military, if you like. And the idea is that as soon as possible, the new young person who will be put to being the incident controller, they're the first one to jump out of the aircraft. That's always the incident controller when they hit the ground. And everybody else is there to support them. And the more senior, older smoke jumpers have an expectation that they will give away leadership as quickly as possible. And the new, younger smoke jumpers have an expectation that leadership will be given to them as soon as possible. So this is a very Yoda-ish sort of concept with no badges of rank and a very flat structure. Grant Beebe, who is the head of the National Interagency Fire Centre, used to be the head of the smoke jumpers. I spent about a wonderful 2 hours just chatting with him about his experiences. And I said, this mentoring thing is really important. He said, I all of my people have a mentor, and they are also expected, as they get appropriate level of experience, to be a mentor. And even though he's the head of the National Interagency Fire Centre, he manages 650 staff. He said, I'm still a mentor. And he said, and I still have a mentor. And this is about that continual development. Interestingly, within the Bureau of Land Management, no mea culpa moments. And they have the National Wildfire Coordinating Group, which sort of is a conglomerate of different firefighting agencies, that kind of led by the Bureau of Land Management. But these people provide the standards. I kind of wonder if this is a bit like American wildfire version of AFAC, that concept, except that leadership is a major plank for them. Leadership is up there as just as important as any of the operational stuff. And you can see here their L180 up to L480, L580 leadership program is a structured program that people work through. There are learning modules. There's also a journal, a journal of experiences. They've got to have a logbook, if you like, of different things that they've done. And along the way, if you look at the National Wildfire Coordination Group leadership courses, you get a feel for how much time is committed to get through. Now, compare this to Australian Volunteer Fire and Emergency Services, where we send people on a 2-day Institute for Disaster Resilience course, which is great, and they talk about some great concepts. At the end of the 2 days, everybody goes, wow, that's fantastic. Compared to what we're seeing here, which is integrated with a personal development plan, with a logbook of activities, where there is a mentor. So all of those elements of leadership learning exist within the US federal sphere that's available for agencies, and a significant investment it is too. So as I continued my journey east, this story kept going, because I visited the US National Fire Academy in Maryland, which is Emmitsburg in Maryland, and my now friend, Eric Skablix, is a wonderful chap, he's a superintendent, and Tonya Hoover, she's the chief of the US National Fire Academy, made me extraordinarily welcome. They couldn't have been more welcoming. And Eric's took me out to visit the New Jersey Forest Fire Service. Again, everybody wants to show you their kit. So that goes back to that firefighter thing. We'll talk leadership, but let's show you the fire trucks. And you wouldn't have thought they have huge wildfire problems in the east coast of the US, but they do, with pines in and around New Jersey. A small agency, about 250, 280 staff. But even though it's a state agency, they use those national leadership units that are produced federally, because they're available, managed by the federal government, but the resources are supplied to any fire agency who want them. It's free to use. You can get your own facilitators. The US National Fire Academy, if you don't have professional facilitators, Eric Skablix and his people will find those facilitators for you. So we have a coherent, joined up story federally across the United States for leadership development. And also I spent time with the US National Park Service, who also use those National Wildfire Coordination Group leadership packages, the L180 up to L580. All national parks personnel are also firefighters, notwithstanding they're also regulatory people and law enforcement people. Admittedly, I was staying at Gettysburg in the United States, simply because there's no accommodation of any meaningful quality at Emmitsburg, and I couldn't stay at the academy, it was all booked out. So I put myself in Gettysburg, but Eric Skablix organised me to spend a day and a half with the US Park Service. And that was great, because the New Jersey Forest Fire Service, the national parks people, they described how they use these leadership concepts, how it trickles right down to their staff, and they're involved in the leadership development, and they didn't describe any mea culpa moments. I also travelled to Washington, DC to meet with some representatives of the US Forest Service. Now you'll see Smokey Bear down there, the iconic Smokey Bear. So iconic that it is a registered trademark. And the US Forest Service is arguably the biggest firefighting agency in the United States, except, even though they're federal, for reasons I'm yet to be able to establish, they did not engage with the National Wildfire fire coordination group leadership packages. They went on their own path with leadership development, but it kind of fizzled out. They didn't quite get to it. It was all about operations. It's quite an old agency. Mea culpa moment. Boom. Bullying, hazing, sexual harassment, sexual assault. So much so that the US Forestry Service was called into question in the US Congress. And guess what that conversation was? Is the US Forestry Service fit for purpose? Maybe we need to wipe it out and start again. So this was where the light went off when I was at the US National Fire Academy and I traveled to Washington. I went, oh, hang on, this is the third story I've heard. This is the third thing where there's been no investment in leadership learning. Things have festered. There's been an explosion. Now, I was previously an intelligence officer in different life of the Australian Border Force and policing. I worked in intelligence analysis. And I wasn't looking for this, and yet it's become a major theme of my findings. It's kind of like a Houston, we have a problem moment, and I'll get to more of that in a moment. At the US National Fire Academy, they integrate their people development with operational hands-on learning, but also conceptual educative learning. All of the courses there are recognised by a range of US tertiary providers like universities, colleges. You don't get the qualification through the US Fire Academy, but you meet all of the requirements of the US National Fire Academy. You take your piece of paper from the US National Fire Academy to whichever university you would like to, and boom, 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 and they go, oh yes, US National Fire Academy, we'll rubber stamp and endorse that because we've seen their product. It's a really clever way of getting some synergy and getting linkages with tertiary providers without having all of the difficulties of deeply embedding with a university provider. And that was work that Eric's had worked to bring that to fruition. And you can see here for their executive fire officer program, and you do get volunteers doing this. Mostly they're paid professional firefighters, but you do get some volunteers going through there because the US National Fire Academy offer all of their courses for free. And if you're a firefighter and your agency says you can go, once you're signed up, the US National Fire Academy will pay for your airfare, they'll pay for your accommodation, they'll pay for all of the learning until you return home to your agency. So this is a federally supported concept that cascades out to all agencies that want to be a part of it. But you can see the time investment. As I'm heading further east, the time investment's going up. Compared to a 2-day course where we talk about leadership in Australia, we don't do anything. Oh, now we're up to 9 weeks of investment. You can start to see and feel the difference. I moved then eastwards into Ontario, Canada, and I spent some time with the folk at Humber Community College. Humber College is in Toronto. It's like a giant TAFE, if you like, and they have a Foreign Emergency Services leadership area that looks after fire, ambulance, paramedics, and the course that they offer is equally offered to paid professionals or people who are volunteers in fire services. Fire services in Canada aren't what we see in Australia. They're sort of almost like policing in the United States. There's lots of little agencies around the place. And my friend Phil Dawson, who was a retired fire chief in Ontario, who introduced me to these people, allowed me to spend some time, or organised me to spend some time at East Gwillimbury, and also with the Rama Chippewas people, which is an Indigenous community, which have a lot of money, a lot of good kit. Once again, everybody photographs me with their kit, but the Chippewas of Rama have a casino, which is really spectacular. And they invest a whole lot of money from the casino into their emergency services. So both of these smaller agencies use volunteers and paid staff. They use the leadership learning concepts that are offered by Humber, by a centralised community college. They cover the cost because there is a cost at Humber. It's not free, but it's not expensive. And it's a trickle up. So even the most junior people start their leadership journey and start their leadership learning from day one. And within East Gwillimbury, within Rama, I saw small fire services which were extraordinarily professional, and the individuals involved exercised what by all accounts was really effective leadership. It was about being inclusive. It was about caring for people. It was about making this place a place where people want to volunteer, because each of them use volunteers as well as paid staff. I also spent some time with the Ontario Association of Fire Chiefs and had a meeting with them to discuss my research. And in Canada, I hadn't heard of any mea culpa moments. And at that point in the journey, I sort of said to them, well, have there been any problems? There were sort of looks around the table and was a little bit coy. They did indicate to me there were problems in certain patches in Ontario where basically the mea culpa moment was emergent. But the various agencies were keeping a lid on it, and there was a report that was being written for the provincial government. And I said, oh, would that be available to have a look at? And they sort of said, well, it's not really ours. We'll see. I'll see if I can get it for you. In the end, I wasn't able to get it. But the backstory that I picked up from talking to people was there were patches that were good in Canada, and there were some problems that were emergent. And it's almost like watch this space. So again, there wasn't necessarily a detonation, but I felt like I was potentially, as I do here, standing on the caldera with the bulging ground, smelling sulfur and feeling rumbling under my feet, and going, are we about to have an eruption here? I'm just wondering. You can see there the investment from the Humber Fire Service Executive Management, all the different certificates. This probably looks very similar to an advanced diploma sort of thing in Australia. I think it's kind of the equivalent. And the various units that people can do. And the thread of the leadership story is woven intimately into those units. From there, I headed eastwards again. This time was to the Danish Emergency Management Agency. An interesting thing, this is part of the Danish military, but it is not military. There is Army, Navy, Air Force, and DEMA. And DEMA has conscripts. Now, the conscripts are in Denmark, male only, although I think that, and quite rightly, that's something that's being queried at the moment, but young women can elect to be conscripted. DEMA gets a really good mix. It's probably about 75% male, 25% female, but they're conscripts. They're people who have volunteered. The trick with DEMA is they put these new young conscripts, if they join the Emergency Management Agency, they join for 9 months. If they elect to go to Army, Navy, Air Force, they only do 6 months. Why would they do an extra 3 months of conscription? Anybody reasonable person would ask. As it turns out, in DEMA, once you've finished your conscription, at the end of the 9 months, you are a fully qualified professional firefighter. You can take that ticket and walk straight onto the back of a truck in the Copenhagen Fire Service or any other fire service in Denmark. So the fire services around Denmark don't like to invest in training, because why would they? Where do you reckon they go for their new people? They go to DEMA, who've done it all funded federally. It's a really, really good system. And it also means that DEMA has, at any given time, up to about 1,000 conscripts on the books at any time. So if they need to deploy 1,000 fully or partially qualified firefighters to assist in an emergency, they can just uplift them and move them anywhere in Denmark. So we've got 1,000 people ready to just surge in to assist local emergency services. And in Denmark, it's a combination of paid fire services and volunteers still. It's a bit of a mix and match around Denmark. You can see here at Tinglev, where I was at their training centre, and they have 6 training centres around Denmark. Again, they showed me all their operational stuff. There's like a collapsed building there where you simulate a pancake building, and they've got a burned out, bombed out building next door. There's a crashed train. There's all sorts of stuff. So training is first class. It's very, very professional. From a leadership perspective, what DEMA do is they will identify their very best conscripts. And at the end of the 9 months, they'll ask those conscripts, would you like to stay on and reconscript for another 9 months? We make you a junior grade sergeant, and you're going to help train the next lot of conscripts. So those cream of the crop stay. At the end of the next 9 months, DEMA's had them now for 18 months. They've had them for quite a long period of time, like an Uber selection process. And I said, what happens then? It was a story I was fascinated to hear. And they said, well, at the end of their second conscription, we've also got the cream off the milk with the filtering. We go to that small number of people who are really high quality and say, would you like a career in DEMA? Sign here, we make you a first level sergeant, and you're on your way as a mid-level NCO. And in 2 years' time, you can apply for officer training. We send you to the military academy. Yes, the DEMA people are a tiny bit older than the military cadets, but they're different, and those people then come out as lieutenants and eventually majors and eventually colonels. And the colonel who was hosting me for the time I was there, I said, how did you start your career in DEMA? And he sort of a bit sheepishly said, I started as a conscript. And I just went, and you built that into a career. And he'd been all over the world on all sorts of deployments and emergencies with a really professional agency. DEMA did not report any mea culpa moments. They take leadership development very, very seriously. I spent time with them trying to understand what's your leadership theoretical framework you use. And the language, like English is great, they speak English fluently, but it was a little bit clunky. I kind of didn't get what I was asking. And it was only on the last day, it was Casper, who's a major, who was hosting me on the last day before I had to get back on the train to go to Denmark to fly to my next destination. And he was trying to understand what I was wanting. He said, what do you mean, the framework? I said, what's the theme? What's the underpinning? And it was only then that the penny dropped. And he said, oh, Haydn, you mean situational leadership? Yes, this is what the CAL FIRE people had deliberately worked out and bought in that they didn't have. DEMA have been using that leadership concept since inception for years, so much so that the question kind of didn't make sense to them because it was like it was just built into the base. And yet they had this consistent concept of using situational leadership, which, as I learned from CAL FIRE, is communication. It's about the language of a leader. It's about the messages that the team members hear. It's about how the communication works between them. And it's very much in the concept of leader as coach of a high-performing team. And a focus is totally on the team outcome. What are we as an organization trying to do? And where do we want to go? I hate using sporting analogies, but it probably has good synergy for a high-level professional sports coach, perhaps. And look, it's worked extraordinarily well. So you can see that the time investment further has gone north, as opposed to what I saw in North America. For your sergeants up to your oversergeant, to your senior sergeants and chief sergeants, you're looking at a significant investment in time. And then to the next level, they go to the strategic leadership of officer training, which is operating in a different space again. I was really looking at the front end, pointy end. From there, I travelled eastwards again, sort of southeast, and found myself in Manila with the Philippines Bureau of Fire Safety. This was interesting to me because in the Philippines Military Academy in Manila, they have a public safety division, and the public safety arm of their military college delivers technical and professional learning for firefighters, corrections, and police. And they have a structured chunk around leadership, which is common to all those agencies. So once again, it's an example of a nationally provided, centralized, common leadership learning standard that cascades out to the agencies. When I was there, they had their, I think it was the 26th anniversary dinner of their National Emergency College. I happened to be there on the day. And you can see I'm meeting up there with the superintendent in charge of their people development. And when you see the lovely flags and everything, I turned up, there was a sign on the door that said, "Welcome, Mr. Haydn McComas and delegation." I turned up in a taxi, it was just me. And yes, the CFS had given me a uniform to wear on the journey, which kind of opened doors, which was great. And I'm very thankful to the CFS for that. But I'm going, well, there's no delegation, there's just me. And they spent a significant amount of time discussing with me how the leadership development works and how it cascades out into their various departments. They invited me to dinner that night, and I spent the evening sitting next to the former Philippines Defence Minister and a recently retired head of the Philippines Defence Force. And there was this volunteer firefighter from Adelaide, Haydn, sitting between them, chatting away about leadership concepts. It was really interesting. You never know where a fellowship will take you. The people you meet is quite remarkable. So there were 5 themes that emerged for my research, and the unexpected one was the mea culpa moment. Critically explosive public reporting leads to really bad outcomes for the agency, and I'm absolutely certain it can be attributed to a failure to invest in leadership development, and I know that's happening here in Australia. So speaking of standing on the caldera, in late 2020, the Victorian SES Volunteers Association, some of your members here today will be familiar with this stuff. The Conduct and Culture Survey, it was not a pretty story. Then in mid-2021, the New South Wales RFS did a grievance and discipline survey. These things are all available on the internet. You can find them, and I put links to them in my report. This was also quite ugly reading. This was mea culpa moment of a sort. Then in April 2022, the CFA in Victoria released their external review of culture and issues management. Again, mea culpa report, so much so that the CFA actually came out and apologised. Oh, we're really sorry that volunteers were treated this badly. And the different threads in here were all around, it's a bullying, hazing, sexual harassment, sexual assault. We're seeing the mea culpa moment. We're standing on it. And more recently, in June 2023, the ACT Emergency Services Agency had their Executive Leadership Alignment Review. Now, it was about bullying and hazing. I don't know that it addressed sexual harassment, sexual assault, but nonetheless, there were some of those elements there which gave rise to a question, are we looking at a healthy environment? What's going on in our uniformed emergency services that is so problematic? And we know we're not investing in leadership learning. And then most recently, January 2024, the Queensland Rural Fire Brigades Association, they wrote their open letter to the Premier. This is an ongoing story. I was only chatting with the fellow who's the head of the Queensland Rural Fire Brigades Association a couple of days ago, just to touch base and see where you're at. And he said, Haydn, this story is evolving and it's about to change gear. So I went, oh, okay. Now, I don't quite know what that means, but I'm guessing it's going to, it's an evolving story that's a problem. The other theme, the next theme, was about knowing our people. We don't understand where our people are at. We don't really invest in having a dashboard for where our people are at. I don't think the agencies are absolutely clear in even how many actual operational volunteers they have. There's what's on the books and there's what's turning up, and that can be different. We also need to look at our leadership models and the critical need to select a theoretical workable model towards an integrated system nationwide, a bit like the Americans have, and New Zealanders are working towards. We don't have common threads there. And also, where are we going to place this leadership development? If we put it in the operational training portfolio, they don't get to it because it's wet stuff on red stuff first. It's rescue ropes and knots and litters onto helicopters. Unless we place it correctly, it's not going to happen. And so I propose maybe it should be sitting with our professional standards people. I think this was a masterstroke by CAL FIRE. And finally, how do we connect the dots on this leadership learning? Whether it should be an internal offering or should be delivered externally. Do we assess it and certify it? Should we use external facilitators? Those external facilitators have to have cultural credits. So where do we find these people to do this? And critically for volunteers, should these certifications for effective leadership delivery, should there be a qualification that you get, an insignia on your uniform? If you don't have this, if you haven't done this set of learnings, don't bother putting your hand up because you can't be put into a leadership position. I mean, we require people to have a driver's license before they drive. It's the same sort of thinking. I get that this is problematic, and when you haven't had something where you turn it on, it's a real problem. I had 5 recommendation areas. I do have them in front of me. There's a total of 14 recommendations. They go into a little bit more granularity, but I'm mindful of time. I won't drill into them. You can quickly see them on the report. If you go to page 11 and 12 of my executive summary, and they're really quite bullet point. They're like 2 sentences per recommendation. But critically for me, one recommendation that hasn't come to fruition yet, I wanted to put up a paper to the AFAC conference to say, we need to be looking at this in Australia. This is urgent. And I did put it up for the last AFAC conference, and no, we're not interested in a verbal presentation. I'm going, why wouldn't we want to talk about this? So I'm deeply indebted to the AWE network and other like areas, because we've got to get a conversation going about this. And I think you and your membership is critical to that. And I'm very cognizant that in many instances, it's female members of our emergency services that are potentially on the receiving end of some of these terrible circumstances. But it affects everybody, and importantly affects the public as well, because we don't have people to do the volunteering service. Wow, well, that's brought me to the end. I know time is tight. I'll hand back to Jan, and I'm happy to hang around. I hope I haven't run out my time too tightly. Back to you, Jan.
Thank you, Haydn. Thank you for that in-depth and fascinating presentation and bringing all those learnings from right across the globe to our members. We have had a couple of questions submitted to the chat, so hopefully people can hang on the line. And if you've got any further questions, please also put them in the chat. So we've got a question here from Olga. My question relates to enacting leadership development at brigade level. How do we do it? How do we ensure that all have equal access, especially if you're a female firefighter? Thank you, Olga.
Oh, yeah, that's a great question. And thank you for your question, Olga, because you're going right down to the granularity of it. And I believe it is possible for brigades to do something. There are a whole range of things you can leverage off of. Unfortunately, the time and the effort to bring those things in is where the problem is, and also getting people to have the time and the capacity to do it, and also getting the agency then to recognise that. But it doesn't mean you can't do things. And certainly in my own local brigade, we've run a couple of short 45-minute, packaged up 45-minute little chunks on things like the code of conduct and what it means to be a professional volunteer. And we talk about that in 45 minutes at brigade level. Now that's very much a micro view. And like the New Zealanders, if we do things in a patchwork, we'll end up with a patchwork result. So I think there is a day. As much as that's positive that the local brigade want to do something, that can also lead to problems for us down the path. So I don't know that I have a fully adequate answer for it, but bless you for asking the question, and getting a conversation going about what we could do in a bigger picture is probably more impactful. I hope that answers your question, Olga. I'm not sure it does.
Thanks, Haydn. We have got another question from Jolie. So Jolie's question is, sorry,
I just stopped sharing this.
That's okay. Jolie's question, sorry, I have to just scroll back up now.
I apologise for that. I've upset
No, not at all. How can we encourage people in leadership positions to pass on their knowledge or mentor others and take on senior roles if they are within an environment or position that they're not really enjoying? So I think she's referring to some senior people who maybe say they don't enjoy the position, but also don't want to give up the perceived power maybe that is associated with that position. So
yeah,
have you got any insights there?
Now that's great. The New Zealanders came up with a concept across that they're trying to move up across all of FENS that potentially answers this question. And one of my recommendations is about developing a framework to transition long-term fire service volunteers from senior leadership positions into esteemed elders and mentors. Kamuata is the term they use in New Zealand. So to become a kamuata, you are the esteemed elder, but to achieve that status, and they have this wonderful set of decorative things that they put on the uniform. It's like a coat of feathers, if you like. So it's a traditional Maori thing. To achieve that status, you have to relinquish all operational leadership positions. You step away. You do not have rank. You cannot go back into the rank, but you transcend into a mentor, and that transcendency is not reversible. And yet it's held up as a highly esteemed thing. So it allows the younger people space to get going and do stuff. So it's about making room for younger people to develop and allowing a respected way for the more senior people to back away, to retain their sense of value and yet continue that value. Oh, by the way, not operational anymore, because you probably need to hand that over. And that wasn't the language the New Zealanders used, but when I was talking with them, I could see how that would work. So that potentially is a concept for that, and they're turning that into a formal thing. And if you want to join this on top of the hill set of mentors in the most highly esteemed group, you have to walk away from the operations. Now you're just a mentor. You are not ever going to be in charge of an incident again, but everybody will be wanting to listen to you. And this is how it works in Maori culture, to get the young people up into leadership position within the group. I really loved it. I think it's a great concept. Whether it's something we could launch here, I don't know. And how you do that in agencies that are particularly where people hang on to rank. It's all about hanging on to rank. It's about me, and not letting anything go to develop new people. This is a bit of a barrier for us. Great question, and thank you. I hope I've offered a thought of value.
Thanks, Haydn. Yeah, that's a beautiful concept that the New Zealanders have developed there. So we'll try and just get through a couple more questions. This one is from Melanie. To address the difficulty of volunteers being financially able to contribute the time, which of the organisations' countries do you think had the most effective, supportive financial and funding approaches to how Australia implement similar kind of concepts to support those people who have to, you know, give up that time they could be using to earn money to volunteer for these important organisations?
Yeah, that's a great question, Melanie. The New Zealanders had put a lot of time and effort with their volunteer coordinators, their volunteer officers, to make sure that individuals were properly recompensed and weren't left out of pocket. The view is over there that we shouldn't have volunteers out of pocket. Doesn't mean it doesn't happen, but it sounds like the way they approach it is much more structured, and they have allocated people with a degree of rank. So these volunteer resource officers are certainly not frontline personnel. And their job is to try and make sure that works. They did share with me that it doesn't always work, and they do sometimes hit problems. Anytime you're handing out money, that's always an issue. But at least they've got somebody there that does it. And I appreciate in Australia, again, it's a patchwork for us, and it becomes an inhibitor to our volunteers. Great question. Thank you for that.
Thanks, Haydn. And the final question, we'll go to Catherine. So she's interested to see how you see leadership development helping join up the whole ecosystem of disaster management, including community and local government leaders who are not part of the emergency services, I guess, official structure, but nevertheless play a role within that ecosystem.
Oh, look, that's a great question, Catherine, and I absolutely concur with it. And in actual fact, the people at a local government level are going to be very intimately involved, particularly as we get more complex emergencies occurring, which aren't just the garden variety ones. We're getting emergency on top of emergency, and we're seeing fire and flood layering on top of each other, or COVID and fire layering on top of each other. So this is where, if we had a national emergency services college or emergency services academy concept, where you could have nodes. This is one of the recommendations in my report, that we would have nodes in each of the capital cities, but it would consistently deliver a standard range of products that were recognised everywhere, and they would be multimodal. It wouldn't just be face-to-face, it might be online. There could be, you could do it as virtual, and it would be available to anybody connected, potentially wider than just the emergency services. And if we could get such a concept going and do it in partnership, and this is where I was looking very broadly with my recommendations, if we do it in partnership with somebody like FENS, if FENS was open to sharing and working together, now we could have an Australasian concept. And at that point, I did have some communication with some people in the diplomatic world, the diplomatic corps, were interested in, wow, Australia is looking for how we could exercise soft power in the Pacific to push back on China. And the question that emerged in that was, well, maybe the fire and emergency services within the states and territories have a role to play in developing capacity for themselves, but also for small Pacific countries, which could be a pushback as soft power and building relationships against China. And importantly, when our people do have to deploy to some of these small Pacific islands in a disaster and emergency, that some of the thinking and the layers and the way that they're operating will have interoperability with Australia as well. So it's a multi-layered approach that cascades out and contributes to our national security. So this isn't just about what happens in local brigades. This goes out to the whole nation, and then our position in our region. And unfortunately, it just seems to me our senior leaders are not getting that, or they're not attuned to that. And I don't know why. Anyway, great question. Thank you for that. And I hope that's a meaningful answer.
No, thank you for that answer, Haydn. And I'm sure our members across the Asian Pacific area will be sympathetic to that sharing of information and knowledge and experience and developing those wider networks across the region. I think that's a really great insight that you've shared with us all. So we've gone a little bit over time, but we've all, I'm sure, taken a lot away from Haydn's presentation today. So thank you so much for your time, Haydn. We will provide a copy of this recording to the network, and we'll also provide a link to your paper as well, Haydn, so that our members can, I'm sure, learn more by reading that.
Very good.
Yes, thank you for your time. Thank you everyone for joining us. As always, you can find further information about our events and the network on our website, and we look forward to seeing you all at future events. Thank you.
Thanks, guys. I appreciate the offer to be here.